Ho, 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 everybody. So, this is now the fourth year in a row that my wife and I have been making some pretty funny Christmas cards, and we've been getting some pretty early feedback that this might be the craziest one. I wanted to show it to you guys and just walk through exactly how something like this is created in Photoshop. So, what I'm going to do is kind of explain how we shot it and then show you all the different layers and the adjustments that I did to the layers to make such a beautiful, seamless holiday card. And just to show you kind of what the setup was like, we took the photo in my living room. I put up 4 flashes on every side, like one in every corner, to kind of emulate the arena, like what the lighting would look like in the arena. And we put the Grinch and Sarah on this gray backdrop, which basically made it so that we could just pull the shadows from underneath them and seamlessly integrate them into the composite. So when it comes to compositing, you need to make sure that when you shoot it, you get the lighting and the perspective and the angle to match as much as possible to the main background of your image. So in this case, the image was shot from about maybe, let's say, 18 inches from the floor, and so that was pretty important so that we don't end up with a situation where Sarah's foot is like higher than the camera, because obviously that would be pretty unrealistic. So that's a pretty important part of compositing, and then another part is matching the colors and the lighting. Um, so we can do that in Photoshop using various adjustment layers. So, and just to go over real quick some of the other Christmas cards that we shot. So this is us riding Peanut, the 16-year-old Chihuahua, and this is how we shot it. So again, just getting the composition correct by kind of shooting from underneath, and then we blended us by shooting from low, and we put this sheepskin to match Peanut's fur. um, this was another one that was pretty funny. So we basically just made the background out of candy canes and stuff like that, and put us again on that same sheepskin. And um, here was the original set that we composited ourselves into. So yeah, it's all fun and games, but let's get into the nitty gritty. I have so many Photoshop layers, it's insane. I guess I'll go through all of them. So if this is the kind of stuff that interests you, then you're going to really enjoy this video, but if not, you're probably going to be bored to tears. So just for reference, this was the original image that I downloaded off of the internet. So here's the original, and here's the result. And as you can see, I took some creative liberties, such as changing some of the signs back here. I made this a little bit more holiday friendly, and that's basically the main changes that I did. So how do we get to this point? Well, I guess we'll just start and add in layer by layer. So we have this guy on the floor, and essentially I want to explain to you like how I did this, but I'm not going to go into every single detail about how everything was done, because I'm gonna assume that you either have a basic assumption of Photoshop, or you just kind of want to see like what the steps were that led to this. So here we go. Okay, so this is the layer that I used to get rid of the floor guy, and you can see it's basically just creating like a background by sampling these other areas on the floor, and then kind of using that to cover him up. Then to get rid of this top guy, I kind of did the same thing. I just sampled the background, and it's not perfect, of course, but it's good enough. So that's kind of the result of that. Then to do the background lighting, just to show you what I'm talking about, that's this red stuff right here. I basically just like created an adjustment layer where I increased the red channel, the red curves, and the RGB to brighten that up. And then I masked that out by brushing in certain areas. Um, so this is kind of what the area, the visible area looks like. And then again, the curves adjustment layer, you're going to add that by going into this channel, this area right here, and then just going to curves right here by clicking right there. And then you can just really mess around. So let's just say I wanted this light to be more blue. I can just really pump that up, and then, now it looks almost purple. But I don't want to do that. I want it to be red, just like the holidays. All right, so then I had these signs. So this was this is pretty fun. I just basically painted over these with brushes. It's nothing, no rocket science here. Um, then I had to add these shadows where the ropes would have been to cover up that area where the man was. I sampled this guy out, and then I basically just took a brush and I sampled, this area and then painted over it, with just a normal brush. Um, Again, going up here, I took these light flares by using a flare brush. So you can go online and find different brushes that will give you different effects. So it's like already a pre-made brush that has like a light flare. And then you just basically paint it right here. I also did that in another way that I'll show you in a little bit. So yeah, I created this Xmas Mania by downloading a font online called WrestleMania font, and then just masking that in and using a gradient layer to create the same effect as like the regular old school WrestleMania, and I just took a WWF logo and then changed the hue on it a little bit. So got to make it realistic, right? Here's another sign, ho ho ho. So you just had a dude in the background that was holding his arms up, and I painted a sign for him. He's obviously a fan of Santa Claus. And yeah, that's the whole background. So this is how we started, and now we have the background. So now we have to put us in there. And how do we do that? Well, multi-step process. I'll show you kind of how we started. So we have Sarah in the living room, and you're gonna make a mask. And this is the mask that I created, and I did that mostly with the lasso tool. So the lasso tool is going to be up here, and you can make various shapes with it, and make sure you have a feather on it so that the edge isn't too hard, and you just trace over it. And I mean, it doesn't have to be exact, but then there's going to be some areas where you might want to brush it in, and look at that, I messed that up. Whoops. So yeah, I mean, this is mask. There's so many ways to mask in Photoshop. My preferred method is the lasso tool. I don't really use like quick mask or anything like that in general, just because I find that it's not like super reliable. But as you can see, like something's not totally right with Sarah here, and I mean, everything's all right with Sarah, but what I mean by that is she's not blended in correctly, and so you're gonna blend her in using these curves layers. So right here you can see her boot might be a little bit too bright, so I darken that up, and then when I create this adjustment layer, I clip it directly to her by clicking Alt, and then I hold that right over in between the layers. So yeah, as you can see here, I darkened her foot there. I changed the hue and the saturation, possibly, maybe not. I don't even know if that layer is doing anything at this point. And then I use another curves adjustment layer just to match her up with the background better. And as you can see, like before I had this adjustment layer on, she's kind of blue, she's a little bit too bright, and just like that, by dialing that in, I got her in there correctly. Another thing that I want to show is how I get the shadow in. So as you can see, without the shadow layer that I've created, we basically just have her standing on air. So this is one of my favorite things about this. So again, going back to this original shot. Let's see. I'll turn the mask off so you can see. So I do have these shadows, which is great. They're on a gray background layer. It makes it so that I actually have real shadows. But the question is, how do you take this and then convert that into a real shadow on a wrestling mat, like in some land far, far away? And that's a very good question. So glad you asked. So I have cut out the background right here, and I've put it on multiply. So let me just change this to normal real quick, and I'll boost the opacity so that you can see what exactly it is, what I'm working with. So as you can see, this is the background right here. But I have it on multiply, and I've created a mask so that not everything in the whole background is visible, right? Multiply is going to give you a sort of darkened mode that basically darkens some areas. So blending modes are a little bit confusing. You can use something like darken, which will basically just darken the layers below. You can use something like multiply, lighten, which basically lightens this layer compared to other ones. But I use multiply for shadows. And then another trick that I use is this blend if. And when you click on blending options, you can adjust this so that you're blending certain things in. I don't know if that makes sense or if that's even doing anything right now. But essentially what this is doing, oh, here we go. Okay, it's a little bit delayed. But as you can see, what I'm doing right now is I'm blending the shadow layer if the shadow layer is within this realm. I don't know if that makes sense, but within this darkness area. And that way I'm not like blending all the light area underneath. I'm not sure if I'm really explaining that correctly, but essentially what you're doing is you're only blending the shadow. Okay, you're not blending the background behind it, and you're not blending the really dark areas. You're only blending the background area, and it's only being visible in areas that are within this certain darkness. So that means that you're still keeping the texture from the original background. You're not, and yeah, and you have the shadow. Okay, I hope that makes sense. There's other people who can explain that a lot better than me. I don't really want to get into it, but it's something that you can play around with if you really want to get into compositing. You're going to need to learn how to blend if. So then we have the Grinch, and again, it's pretty much the same thing as what I did with Sarah. We have the Grinch and the floor, and I've separated that into two different things. So here's the Grinch with no mask, here's the Grinch with a mask, and then here's the floor layer, which is also on multiply. And I have the opacity set to 32%. And you can see if I darken that, I can get more shadows, but you don't want it to be unrealistic. So you just kind of, you're going to want to play around with this till you get the right setting that makes the most sense for your composite. And yeah, this is definitely an art form. It's not a science, but hey, I settled on 37% here, and I'm also using adjustment layers to get my hue and my saturation. So right now you can see, like, with the hue saturation layer on, you can see I desaturated it so that I don't get this red that I see in the original image. And then I also gave myself some contrast on the shadow so that it shows up a little bit more. And I have some more adjustment layers on this whole thing. So as you can see, without this, the Grinch is way too bright. So I just added a curves layer, clipped it to this group, and bada bing, bada boom, the Grinch matches the rest of the background correctly. Another thing that I did on this, so as you can see, the Grinch is a pretty furry dude, but as you can imagine, making a mask that looks exactly like this is going to be pretty difficult. So what I did was I downloaded a brush on Photoshop, a Photoshop brush on the internet that looks like hair, and I turn it into the color of the Grinch's fur by selecting it, and then I basically just paint it in. As you can see, I have this brush, it looks like hair, and you just paint it in. And then that helps you give you a much better seamless composite. And so I did that in several areas, including on his jacket and on other like furry areas, like I gave him some cheek hair and that kind of stuff. Pretty fun, huh? Pretty fun. Photoshop is cool. Um, yeah, and then I did a couple other adjustments on the Grinch. So as you can see, I had to make some local adjustments to make this fur a little bit darker and desaturate it a little bit. It was like a little bit too red. Um, and then I desaturated the Grinch as a whole, just so that he blended better with the rest of the background. And one more curves layer just to balance the color out a little bit. All right, so you're kind of getting the hang of it. You basically put your subject in. You make sure that you shoot the subject from the right perspective with the right lighting. Then you just drop them in. You mask them correctly, using a lasso tool. That's what I use most of the time. Sometimes you use brush tools around certain edges if they're a little bit softer than other ones. And then you make various local adjustments to give yourself a more seamless composite and match the subject to the background. That's the basic principle of it. And so now we'll do one more, and that's with me. And I was flying through the sky, and I was looking a little blue. But I'll show you kind of how I had to work this. This was also a pretty unique one. Um, so so this is how I looked. Um, I masked myself in like this, and as you can see on the top side, my hair was not perfect, and so this is a little bit of a complicated procedure here. But as you can see, I ended up with some pretty good hair cutout, and the way that I did that was by taking this image. Okay, let me see. So I took this hair image from another shot, and I put it over my head, and then I did the same thing with the blending mode. So as you can see, this is the original one. This is the original shot. But if you blend it so that this layer, only the light stuff is visible, you end up with a really clean hair mask. Does that make sense? So because I have really white hair and a really dark background, I'm able to get this really nice, clean, seamless hair backdrop. And so that's a multi-step process um, that involves, making sure that you have a pretty clean backdrop with a hair that like stands out from the backdrop a little bit, and then a blending mode that will enable you to separate the layers pretty well. So hope that makes sense. I can totally understand if it doesn't. There's a lot of other tutorials on Photoshop that show you how to blend hair using a blend if mode. So if you want to find out more about that technique, I suggest you go ahead and look it up on YouTube. I highly recommend Flern's tutorials, Phlearn. Aaron Nace has done some really clear and concise Photoshop tutorials. So as you can see, I am really blue. I'm a little bit light. And so what I'm going to need to do is add a little bit of contrast and fix the color. So I had to make myself a little bit more saturated, a little bit more blue, and then a little bit darker. And just like that, I fit right in. So, the darkening of it was really what made the biggest difference. Um, so, you're seeing this now, but you're wondering, how did I get so buff? So what I did was I took just this version of myself. I made a new layer with just that by merging visible. So you make everything dark except for, or you make everything invisible in your document except for the subject, and you merge that by hitting on the Mac Shift Command Option E, which merges just the visible layers, and then you end up with a new layer of just that. Okay? And so then I took that and I took that layer into the liquify tool, and I gave myself a bunch of muscles to make it look like I look like a wrestler. And I will show you a little bit about this liquify tool. It's pretty easy. Like, you can just take this finger and just like push your muscles around. And if you want a sort of more broad stroke, you can make the brush bigger. If you want a more specific one, you can make it smaller. But yeah, as you can see, my muscles are getting huge, getting a little bit distorted, but I look like a wrestler, right? So if you ever see those Instagram influencers with the huge butts and stuff like that, this is how they do it. Yeah, now I'm really swole. Look kind of like a fat Santa Claus. Maybe I should have done it more like that. But yeah, that's basically how you do it. And so now I look buff, getting jacked with P&Nitty. And then just to close that out, I think I did a couple more localized adjustments. So this, I just making myself a little bit more blue in these areas, or sorry, a little bit more yellow, and then a little bit shifted the hue a little bit. Anyways, made the face a little darker, and that's basically it. And so then one last step that I would recommend doing in a composite is making a noise layer. So a noise layer will help you blend your image all together. And what you do essentially is make a new layer, and then you select a 50% gray color. So it's not too dark, not too light. It's just 50% completely desaturated. And then you're going to fill your layer with gray, and then you select filter, noise, and then add noise. And so now I've got like some noise. I don't know if you can see it, but essentially like I'm creating these speckles, and I can make a monochromatic so that way like I'm not changing the color at all. And then I add that, and then I'm going to put this on overlay mode. And what overlay mode does is it just makes it so that it's a neutral effect. It doesn't darken it or lighten it or do anything like that, except for you add some noise to your image. And that way your image is blended a little bit more smoothly. Like the background elements fit in better with the foreground elements. Pretty straightforward trick. And then what you can also do is add a color. So I just added like a green, like a slight green, and that just ties everything all together. And then just like that, you have it. Xmas Mania. So Merry Christmas. I hope you learned something, and y'all have a happy holiday season and be good. All right. Peace.